Imagine looking up at the sky and, instead of seeing stars, you see giant glowing arcs, stretching from horizon to horizon, not just at night, but even in broad daylight. Golden rings, wrapping around the planet like cosmic jewelry. No, this isn't science fiction. This is what life would be like. If Earth had rings like Saturn, let's start with the obvious. What would we actually see? If Earth had rings the same size as Saturn's, stretching hundreds of thousands of kilometers across, they'd be impossible to ignore. From the equator, you'd see massive bands arching across the sky like bridges of light. At night, they'd reflect sunlight like a giant halo. In cities near the poles, the rings might look like glowing vertical lines cutting through the sky, or disappear entirely, depending on the angle. And from space, Earth would be stunning, a blue planet wrapped in shimmering silver rings. For Earth to have rings, something massive had to go wrong. Maybe a moon got too close and broke apart, or an asteroid 20 kilometers wide slammed into it, sending debris into orbit. As long as that debris stays within Earth's Roche limit, the zone where gravity tears things apart, rather than letting them clump into moons, it can form a stable ring. But those rings wouldn't last forever. They'd slowly fall to Earth over millions of years. So if we had them today, we'd be living in a rare, visually stunning moment in time. The rings would reflect tons of sunlight. Even during full daylight, you might still see their faint glow. At night, the moon would be a background character. The rings could light up the landscape like a permanent twilight glow, changing how animals sleep, migrate, and hunt. Nocturnal creatures might struggle to hide. Birds that navigate using starlight would get confused. Some plants might never experience true darkness, changing how they grow. Now here's where it gets wild. Human history would be totally different. Imagine ancient humans building monuments, not for the moon or stars, but for the massive glowing arches in the sky. We'd have myths about gods traveling across the rings, civilizations that aligned temples and pyramids to ring shadows instead of solstices. Navigators might learn to sail by the rings. Cultures near the equator would see them best, maybe even becoming scientific powerhouses earlier in history. The rings would shape art, religion, astronomy, even war. Here's something you might not think about. Rings cast shadows, big ones. Depending on their tilt and density, they'd block sunlight in certain regions, plunging areas under them into permanent shade for weeks or months at a time. Some countries might never get full sunlight. Others might have cooler temperatures, affecting agriculture. Crops would need to evolve to lower light conditions. You could literally walk from daylight into dusk just by crossing into a ring shadow zone. Global climate patterns would shift dramatically. Rings look pretty until you try to leave the planet. If the debris is thick enough, space agencies would have a huge problem. Rocket launches could slam into icy fragments the size of cars or baseballs, traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour. We'd need new launch windows, custom flight paths, maybe even space elevators that thread between ring gaps. In short, space travel gets riskier. But satellites? They could use the rings to harvest materials or set up orbital mining. Yep, we'd mine the rings. So what happens when rings decay? Eventually, gravity pulls ring particles downward. They'd burn up like meteors, creating constant meteor showers around the equator. It would be like Earth had a built-in light show every single night. But if a large chunk made it through the atmosphere, it could hit Earth like a bomb. That's one of the reasons Earth doesn't already have rings. Our moon is too stable, and Earth's gravity eventually cleans up debris. Rings are spectacular, but temporary. Where you live changes everything. Your experience of the rings depends on where you live. At the equator, the rings would form perfect arcs overhead, slicing the sky into two halves. At mid-latitudes like the US or Europe, the rings would appear at an angle like glowing ribbons stretching from horizon to horizon. At the poles, you might barely see them or not at all. And during eclipses, forget it. A solar eclipse through the rings would be one of the most jaw-dropping sights in human history. So, could Earth ever get rings? In theory, yes. If a future moon gets shattered, if a mega asteroid hits us just right, or maybe, just maybe if we build one. Some scientists have even speculated about creating artificial rings for solar shade, communication, or energy collection, but we'd need to balance beauty with risk. One miscalculation, and you've created a death belt around Earth. So, what if Earth had rings like Saturn? The skies would glow, the nights would shimmer, history would rewrite itself, but Earth would become less of a home and more of a cosmic artwork. Maybe we don't need rings to appreciate our planet. Maybe we just need to look up and imagine, because sometimes the most amazing planets are the ones we already live on.